Low prices on erectile dysfunction.
Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and this is The Broken Meeple, a show where I devote my time to ranting and raving about board games, but usually more the ranting part. This one, Ada's Dream from Alleycat Games by Tony Lopez, I demoed very briefly for about, 2 to 3 rounds at the expo. I think last year, probably 2024, and I had good hopes for it. It said, well, okay, this has got good potential so far. It's not the most thematic game in the world. It's got an interesting setting, following the likes of Ada Lovelace, who was essentially like the pioneer of the first computer. But this one is, at its core, essentially a Euro game that uses dice as a part of the mechanic and lets you generate victory points. You know, it's going to be one of those types of games. Best comparison I can make is the game Newton. I forget who did that one. Was that a Simone Luciani one? I'll double check and put it on the screen. But that one was kind of like a big mishmash of mini games, very Eurofied, but quite cool. It had some interesting mechanics in it, and you could decide whether to focus on one aspect or diversify. Well, this has definitely got that same feeling. I believe I put it on Facebook when I put some pictures up and called it Newton with a side order of crack. Not sure exactly where that definition came from, but it definitely feels like it's got that feel. Like you've got some like mini games on the board, a central mechanic to tie it all together, but then you've also got stuff on your player board that you're jiggling around with a lot more than say your player board in Newton. So it's definitely got that kind of Euro feel. It's going to appeal to that crowd. So, comes in a big box. This is technically, I believe, the deluxe version that was on Kickstarter. I think Kickstarter people are getting their copies now or very soon, and it should be released at Essen, hence I wanted to get this review out. But the main difference between retail and deluxe, I believe, is just component upgrades for the most part, and a small expansion, which I won't be talking about for the purposes of this review. It's quite a small expansion, and at the end of the day, I was mainly able to get games of this played solo as well as in a group with the base game only. So maybe on the podcast in the future, I'll talk about the expansion that's in here as time goes on, but for now, I just want to focus solely on the base game. So, Ada's Dream, is it a dream or an absolute nightmare?
Get on with it.
So in Ada's Dream, you are building your own little prototype computer to try and impress Ada to say, look, I can get this to work, you want me to do it, which is usually represented by scoring the most victory points, as it was in real life.
What the hell are you talking about?
Okay, it's not exactly 100% accurate to how it turned out at the time, obviously, because, I mean, Ada Lovelace had a different history, but you do have a little book on the side that tells you all about the history of it, so if you're into that sort of thing, by all means, go and read it. But the idea is that you have a board that will be plugged in with 9 dice as the game goes on. As soon as you get 9 dice, endgame trigger, there you go. But you have a choice of doing a workshop action or a corner main action. The corner main actions require you to collect the respective coloured dice. So first you need to use the workshop. The workshop action works with these little cubby holes with 3 dice apiece to begin with. And what you'll do is that you'll choose one, pick up the die that's represented, move it to the next one along. You can spend cold to mess around with values and movement, and you'll kick out a die of equal or lower value. Now, by doing so, you get the bonus for that particular area, but also what you're hoping to do is not only get the dice that you want in order to trigger actions later, but you're also hoping to trigger assignment bonuses on your board, which essentially are little objective bonus cards that you can get throughout the game, where the more you have in a certain color, the more you can propel yourself up these research tracks that get you specific bonuses for dealing with that particular action. Again, if you want to focus on green, for example, you level up high in green. But the other main thing that you're doing is that you are manipulating your hand of partner cards. These are people that you associate with and they give you cool bonuses. But in order to play one of these, you must have taken a die from here that matches the requirement on the top left. And typically that ends up being something of quite a low value, 3, 2, or 1. There are ones that let you augment the value of a die or spend the die value in money, but of course a 6 is going to be quite a lot of money to spend. That doesn't mean high values are bad. High values will generally mean more victory points for stuff you do on your board. So there is a, what do I go for, low or high? But these cards are a staple of the game. You have 8 in your hand to be 8 available to begin with, and basically you always have 8. So you can get more cards as the game goes on that are better, but every time you gain one, you've got to get rid of another. So it's not really a deck builder. It's more like, you know, yes, you do draw a hand and you do have a mini deck, but you're always manipulating 8 cards, so you don't end up with like massive deck builders going on. But the idea is once you've got the die, it will store on your board, and then you can use that die to do one of the corner actions. Well, what have you got? Well, for example, green, you've got these columns where if you put your discs as you do them into the slots, you get the bonus as pictured, but it costs you innovation, which is another resource to gain the respective bonuses, and there's a little bit of area control for points and the like. In the blue section, you have, similar to what Newton had actually, you have the travel section. So you travel across the UK, you have a little meeple that starts here, and you can go to the different university and city spots. They get your bonuses, you put your disc down on the respective city, it gets you points at the end of the game, but also cool bonuses. I mean, it is very much a game of combos and bonuses here, much like a points euro. What do you go figure? The yellow section, the meeting rooms, is a small area control section for endgame bonuses, which are based on the cards that you have at the end. They have little science symbols, so you get points for having lots of the blue, the green, the yellow. But the main reason you go to here is because the cards you start with are fine, but you're going to want some more powerful ones. And this isn't even all of them. There's basically a deck of these cards. They're mixed up as the game goes on, and then the display will come out. If you take the yellow action, you have means of playing more cards for free or gaining better cards. You know, it's basically predominantly for that. And then finally, you've got Ada Study, the purple action, which gets you those assignment cards I mentioned earlier for leveling up on research tracks, but it gets you certain other things like workshop gears for your board. We'll get onto that in a minute. But mainly you're there for these program cards, which are these cool little sort of punch board bits of cardboard that actually stand up on your board like so. It's quite cool. But essentially a bit like a tachograph or whatever, or however you pronounce it for computers. But these basically give you objectives to aim for with your grid, because you're going to be lining up dice in rows and columns. So you might have one here that says, all right, okay, all dice in this row must be green, and if you do, you get 8 points at the end. Fine, I'll put it in this column here. So this column needs to be all green dice. You know, they're basically little mini objectives that you could aim for as a means of scoring points. So with all that said and done, that's kind of a brief overview of the main board. What exactly are you doing on your actual board? Well, down here, you have two main aspects, really. You have your steam power, which caps the amount of victory points you can get for each row. You just level that up as the game goes on. But mainly, you are trying to get your discs off this board and substitute it with dice that you have collected for action, so they will slot in the square spots like so, and build gears. These gears come in plus, minus, and if you go to the respective yellow room, multiplication symbols. And the idea is that at the end of the game, for each row and column, depending on the gears you've got, you essentially work out the sum, and that's victory points for that row. So for example, I mean, let's say I take a 6, 1, and a 5. I put it down here, and then let's say the gears I've got are a subtraction and a plus. You start with a couple of subtractions, so you're going to have to deal with it. Then this one says I do 6 minus 1, which is 5, and then add 5, 10. So that's a 10 victory point row. I mean, I could, for example, stick a multiplication 1 in the end there, and suddenly that one is 6 minus 1, 5, times 5 for 25 points. Problem is, your Steam value caps how many points you can get for it. So if you're going to do high value rows, you need to have leveled up your engine in order to be able to do it. So the game basically carries on in that fashion. Players take it in alternate turns to decide whether they want to do the workshop action or a corner action. After each turn, they can publish with a book currency to do other actions or construct the gears. You've only got about 18 turns in the game as it goes. I mean, you've got to collect 9 dice and put 9 dice on your board. So on average, you're about 18 turns. So you haven't got much time. You need to be pretty efficient. But as soon as somebody fills up all 9 dice squares on their board, that's it, finish equal turns, and then total up all the endgame points, which come from numerous locations, there's quite a few here, and see, of course, who's got the most, and that person wins.
Of course!
There is definitely a lot of point variety in this game. Woo! If you like Path to Victory and like options for how you're going to play the game, this is definitely one you're going to look at, because you've got lots of different ways to score points here. Various different things on the corner actions are going to get you points, and you've got your player board as well. But your paths, again, are you going to focus on these punch boards? Are you going to try and do really well with the dice here? Are you going to focus more on yellow, blue, green, purple? Are you going to diversify a little bit? Do you care too much about the cards that are in your hand? Are you more concerned with getting the gears on your board? board. There's a lot of cool ways to approach the game, and you can have a very different experience each time. Newton had the same pro to it. Now, in terms of your point scoring, this isn't so much of a flaw. I would say more of something you need to be aware of. The bulk of your points are going to come from your board. When you're adding them all up at the end and going, right, I get points for this, points for this, points for this, this is the bulk of it. And if you're not making players aware of this, because the rulebook doesn't make your players aware of this, then they could be a little bit soured at the end.
You lose! Good day, sir!
You need to be aware that this is the point scoring, okay? If you go for those punch cards, you could earn a good 40 to 50 points by having a bunch of those program cards of high value that you do well in. But then if you don't care about the program cards and you just simply get some really high row values here with an uncapped Steam value, they could be worth a good 50 plus points by themselves. The stuff you get for the corner actions is still good, you can't ignore it, but the amount that you're going to get for, say, doing a lot of travel or doing a bit of area control here or the meeting rooms down here with the cards in your pile is not going to be anywhere near as much as this. They will add to your score and they're still useful, but you can't ignore your player board. You must do something good here, otherwise you will just outright lose. There's just no other way to go about it. It's not a flaw of the game, but the book doesn't really tell you or warn you of this, and so I'm making you aware.
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Component-wise and artwork for, this is effectively a deluxe edition, but for the most part, the only main changes for deluxe are some component upgrades. You've got the little sort of plasticky coal tokens, and you've got these cool, sort of 3D books. I think they're in the basic version as well. But what I do quite like is that the brass tokens are effectively little brass bars. I mean, I don't know exactly what they're made out of, but they're pretty nice feeling little metal bars. These are cool for the brass. Everything else though is kind of standard. You've got your screen printed meeples, wooden discs and standard colored dice. I mean, most of the production quality is just the fact that you have got quite a lot of pieces. I mean, this isn't everything. I just grabbed a little sample of everything. But, you've also got embroidered, bags for solo and the dice. You've got a smorgasbord of objectives that you can interchange these with the board to have variety in each game. You've got more cards than just this. You've got all multiple different cogs and resources and stuff. There's quite a bit in the box, and I haven't even got out the solo components yet. We'll worry about that later. So you're definitely getting a decent amount of stuff here for your money, and the artwork is fine. It does the job. There's nothing here to really write home about. Probably the nicest looking thing artwork wise is probably the cover itself. The rest of it is kind of standard, what you would expect from this game. And even though there is artwork sort of hidden around your player board and that, there's just too much in the way of iconography and graphic design for the actions that you're doing and the bonuses you're getting for you to really admire it. It's relatively nice looking. It doesn't look ugly on the table. It's certainly nice and colourful, which is going to draw the eye across. The graphic design could be a little bit improved in places. I mean, there is quite a lot of iconography and you are going to need your rulebook reference aid in order to understand some of them because they're not all quite that intuitive. I would have liked there to have been a decent sized reference card with that sort of thing on it really, rather than having to go to an internal back page to find that out, because the back quick reference page doesn't really tell you very much. It gives you a basic thing about the workshop action, starting resources, and a few key reminders. And then it wastes time on the credits and the index, which ideally could have been internal in the book. But yeah, not much of a quick reference there. I would have much rather had an iconography guide that wasn't in the book. That being said though, the graphic design on the board is a little bit small to the eye. You are going to have to, if you've got bad eyesight, you might struggle to see across the board for certain aspects, particularly with the travel. It's relatively clear. It's not hidden in too much there. It's just, maybe if the board was a little bit bigger, it could be improved more, but the game is already quite a table hog. You've got this big board, you've got player boards like this, other cards and things you're going to be playing. If it was any much bigger, you would need a much bigger box.
Please excuse the crudity of this model. I didn't have time to build it to scale or to paint it.
I do particularly like these reference aids though, and these reference aids are really, really cool because it gives you kind of a summary of the publish actions, which are good because there's one for each action. You need to know roughly what they do. But it gives you a nice turn sequence reminder, step-by-step guidance for how to go about each turn. And then on a separate reference card, you've got kind of like the Laserders did with things like the Gallerist and that, kind of like a step-by-step process for how the main action and the advanced actions work, advanced actions being the ones you get from breakthrough tracks, work for each of the corner ones. So these two are very good rules reminders. And in terms of the rules themselves, it's not that complex a game to learn. I was actually quite surprised by that. For as many moving parts as this game has for you to think about, it's not that complex a game. I mean, yeah, you're not going to be playing this with new players, and this is certainly not a light game, but it probably still ranks somewhere in the mid-weight category for rules complexity compared to some of the like heavier games, you know, when you're certainly not going to be learning as many rules as something like Galactic Cruise or something from this year. You know, there's definitely less to deal with here because, you know, when you're going through the workshop action, that's pretty straightforward how that works. The corner actions only have so much to explain for each in terms of rule set. You know, they work quite simply. I mean, let's face it, pretty much all the rules are just summarized on 2 reference cards here for the main thing that you do there. Where the slight difficulty comes in is that there's a few little nuances for how the displays refresh and a couple of other bits and bobs here and there that aren't explained on the reference cards. You need to have some memory of it, but you know, really, the complexity of this game comes down from just the sheer amount of options of planning you have to do well at the game, as opposed to trying to understand the rules of the game. That bit will actually come pretty quickly.
Barely an inconvenience.
With games like this, particularly with what happened in Newton, you need to have some kind of interconnectivity between the different actions. Newton, I found, had some of that, but you did sort of find that maybe some of the actions were very exclusive. Like, you know, you're doing a lot of the student research tracks in Newton. I didn't feel like it was really affecting what I did in other places too much. There is some of it, but just not a ton of it. Here, though, they are very much interconnected. Yes, you can focus on one particular aspect, but chances are you are going to have to diversify a little bit, particularly if it's something that you need. And there's a lot of different ways to get what you need. Yes, the dice are going to be dependent what's in the workshop. You have got colorless dice, which act as wilds for doing actions, so it's not like, oh, there's no pink dice there, I can't do the pink action. Well, you can, you're just going to have to do the colorless versions. May not be ideal, but everybody's aware of this, and you just have to deal with it. But you do have a lot of ways to mess around with the die values, both on here and on your board. Some of the publish actions let you jiggle around with values after you've placed them. So if you don't like your sums or program tasks to begin with, you can augment them later as part of your game. But there's also just a lot of different ways to achieve what it is you need. Like, for example, let's say I really need a cog.
Oh my.
I really need one of these cogs, okay? So an addition cog. Now, there are several ways I can get one depending on what I've done in the game. For example, if I go to certain universities on the travel board, like Manchester here, then I can actually get one of those. I could even construct one for free if I want to. Okay, fine. If I go to the institution board here, one of the lower bonuses in the British government, I can actually get a cog there. Perhaps I have one of these cards. In fact, well, here's a card to let me, you know, construct one for free. But there are cards here, for example, you know, Andrew Cross, you know, they're all famous people. But if I play this one, then I get a study reward, which down here can include getting a purple cog. Or you could just go do the purple action itself and get one. So there's 4 different ways that you can get that cog. And I've described one for blue, one for green, one effectively for yellow, and one for purple. So, you know, if you feel like, I really need this particular thing, you don't feel pigeonholed into like, well, the only way I can get this is if I do that, and I suck at that, or I can't do that, you know. No, you do actually have quite a few choices for how you're going to do it. It's just which ones you prefer, which one's easier for you, which one's going to take less time, take less resources. You know, there's a lot of different ways to approach your little short-term conundrum, and I like that because it means that the actions don't feel too exclusive.
We're not so different, you and I.
2 aspects of this game for me really sell it. Firstly, the puzzly aspect of which dice you're going to try and get on your board, where you're going to put them, which bonuses to trigger, and then the manipulation of said dice to, you know, meet these program tiles. That's a good fun aspect in itself. For me though, I think my favorite aspect is the cards. Now the cards are not like a major part of the game. You can just stick with your basic cards for the game and still do pretty well. You know, you don't have to get upgraded cards. You might just get 1 or 2 as the game goes on. But I like this aspect that part of your decision making is not just how many points you want on your board, but that lure of, oh, I really want to play this guy, okay? I really want to play this guy because if I play this, I get an innovation boost and I get to have 2 workshop bonuses. Nice, I could get this and this, which I kind of need some more money in that. But in order to do that, I've got to take a free. Well, where do I take a free from? If I take one there, I could augment it with a coal maybe, or I didn't want that color. But if I augment that green to a free with some coal, then I can kick out the green. That will give me the chance to play this, and that is going through your head all the time. you're constantly thinking about your next turn. There is a bit of downtime if people do AP. We'll get onto that maybe in the flaws section, but you know, between your turn and your next turn, you should really be thinking about the best way to go about it, and you can create a lot of good combo-tastic turns, as it were, where you take one action which lets you play this card. Because of a breakthrough effect, you're allowed to play another card for free. This allows you to get a bonus somewhere which gets this. I mean, it is very much about efficiency of actions, so if that's your style of Euro that you like, this one is gonna like sing to you in spades. It's, you know, just a good little fun puzzle that you are doing throughout. So I've mentioned a few little negatives here and there. Just to sort of recap, I mentioned about having to tell players that this is a fundamental part of your scoring, the fact that the graphic design is a little bit on the tiny side, particularly with the travel map, so there may be a little bit of squinting for those in the wrong light or those who are a little bit on the short-sighted side. For me, one little flaw with the game that I would have liked explored a bit more is the cards. I mean, I know I said this is one of my favourite aspects of the game. Yes, I do love the whole playing of the cards. I do wish that there was maybe more ways to get more of them. You know, you have to focus on the yellow action to get the most out of the cards, whereas other times you're kind of just dropping in every now and again to get them. And you only have 8 available to you, which is fine. I don't want this to create like a whole deck building mechanic on the side, but you know, in order to get a lot of these cards to replace the ones you've got, they come in tier 1 and 2, and you have to start off with a few tier 1s, which are fine, but they're not the best cards in the world. And if you're the only one going for more cards, you're the one who's going to have to sift through them, even though the displays do refresh twice as fast as they do in other games as they go along. Because you take one card, it also bins the one on the far right, so they do refresh quite quick. But it's really when you get into these level 2 cards that you start seeing some really powerful effects. But by the time you've replaced, say, half of your hand, maybe 6 or so cards in your hand, then the game's kind of nearing its end game point. And there's only so many times you're going to be able to constantly play that same card over again. I mean, you can work towards it. There are many ways that you can draw cards out of your deck and then shuffle the new ones back in. And so if you have an engine that works well with this, you could rinse and repeat the same card multiple times. But it takes quite a bit of effort to do so. And maybe I would have just liked more ways to, you know, play cards or draw cards elsewhere. Now, there are some. You know, the travel action has some now and again. There are some on the green board as well, but I think maybe just the acquisition of new cards would have been nice to have got, you know, some of those on other boards as well. But say it's not a big deal. It was just one little niggle that I had.
Crazy gibberish.
AP and length can be a little bit of a factor here. You know, there is a decent amount of options that you've got. I mean, you've got lots of different spaces from the workshop to take your dice from. Which dice are you going to move? Which ones are you going to kick out? What are you going to leave for other players potentially? If you're doing a corner action, right, if I do this, I trigger this bonus and trigger this bonus and trigger this bonus. Some turns can take a little while, there's a bit to think about, and certainly with a 4-player game that length is quite noticeable. I mean, it does say 90 to 120 minutes on the box. That's pretty optimistic. I mean, if you're not including the teach in that, I can tell you that for now. And I have played a 2-player game of this where it took more than 2 hours to play the game with a 2-player, though that was because the opponent was very much on the slow side.
You're those ones there! The ones next to you! Now make your move!
There's a lot of potential for players to freeze up with AP here, and I would certainly recommend those type of players maybe don't go near this game.
With blackjack and hookers.
You know, the length is going to vary a bit. You know, 90 minutes certainly for a solo game once you've got the rules down. Trust me, it takes a lot longer when you don't have the rules down. You try to jump into it normally. But 90 to 120 is probably more realistically around the 120 to 180 mark. You know, you shouldn't often get to 3 hours, but 4 players, learning it for the first time, teach, and some AP inducing, it can go on for a fair while. So even though that this isn't quite as complex as some of these other games, it can still take sort of as long as one of them.
How long is this going to take?
And one last little niggle that I found with it was the player scaling aspect. There's not a lot of it in this game. You can play this with 2, 3, or 4 players. Thankfully, they're not stupid enough to make this a 5-player game. But the idea with this is that the only thing that scales, really, is the number of dice that you have. You remove so many dice from the bag, depending on number of players. But that doesn't make really any modicum of difference, really. You have the same amount of each color die. There is always 3 dice on each bit. So whether you have less in the bag than you would have normally based on the number of players is kind of irrelevant. You don't notice that aspect has changed. but nothing else in the game scales. The number of things on display doesn't scale. There's not like a 4-player one that you don't use in a 4-player game. There's no difference with the number of cities you can visit or the number of bonuses you can get. Nothing else in the game is dependent on player count. That, I think, causes a little bit of a problem when you do play this with a lower player count. Because even though these displays, refresh quite rapidly, if you're in a 2-player game, particularly if you're going for different aspects of the game, you may find that some stuff just doesn't refresh quite as quickly as you would like. Although I do like the fact that the displays do refresh pretty fast compared to other Euro games, otherwise they would remain too stagnant. But I'm kind of surprised that they didn't put on something like, okay, if you're playing a 4-player game, use all the spaces. If you're playing a 2-player game, only use this many spaces. It's kind of a little bit odd. I mean, I like having all the options, but maybe there just needed to be something else in that regard. But again, nothing else scales. You've got starty resource differences. That's kind of a bit it. You don't have a different number of cards. You don't have a different number of cogs or anything. Nothing else on here is dependent. So mainly the only difference that you add with players is more time, as I mentioned, with the AP value, and more contention for spots. 2-player, you're not really fighting over territory quite as much. You're not doubling up on universities. You're not nicking quite as many of these green bonuses or nicking a bunch of the meeting room spots. In a 4-player game, though, whoa, you are. Because there's no extra spots to go for. You're constantly going to the same unis. You're constantly nicking bonus spots here that you would like to have yourself. The meeting rooms are going to be contended by the end of the game. So, if you want a more evil style game, you're going to want to play this with 4, but of course, you then have to deal with the time length aspect of it. So it's kind of hard to say what the sweet spot is, but when all said and done, really 3-player does again feel like the sweet spot. Enough of a contention between spots without adding too much length to the game, but at least having some kind of contention for the spots and not just having it too open-ended. So, having a look at the solo mode. The solo mode is being done by David Digby. There's a whole separate book on the solo mode. I mean, it covers the expansion rules as well, but you've also got the solo rules and a big appendix for everything. Solo rules are about, say, 2, 4, 6, 8-ish pages that you gotta learn. It's not the lightest of solo rules to get into, and I made a bit of a mistake when I learnt this game by learning the rules first and jumping straight into the solo mode to learn that on top. Don't do that. It's not a good idea.
Oh no, I've gone cross-eyed.
There's just too much for you to try to absorb to get straight into solo mode. I do highly recommend that you play a multiplayer run through first. Could be with other players, or you could just take turns yourself and get used to the mechanics, because you need to get that in your system really before you try to absorb the solo stuff, which does, for what you're doing is all the same, but when you're trying to deal with what the AI is doing, it's maybe just a little bit too much from the initial get-go. But, I made that mistake, I will deal with it. But once you got used to the solo rules, it's actually a pretty solid system, actually. It has its own board, similar to yours, but what essentially happens is that you choose a level of difficulty, and it will have 4 different assignment boards, so it prefers certain colors in certain orders. If I do the easy setting, it prefers blue, then green, and yellow, and pink, much like your own board. But if I was to pick the highest difficulty, level 4, then it prefers, well, it does in the opposite way around, it prefers the pink, then the yellow. This does actually make a difference during the game in terms of how many points it can score. But on top of that, it's also got, based on the difficulty level, a set of solo rewards. So a lot of these icons and bonuses the AI doesn't use. Instead, you effectively slot this little bit here, and one of the dies keeps leveling up and going back and increasing in value. Whenever it gets certain bonuses for stuff, it effectively gets what's called solo rewards. It levels up, and depending on the die value, it will trigger other effects here. The higher the difficulty, the more lucrative the rewards, or the quicker they will start getting rewards. This is like a fundamental part of the game, and this is why I say that you should probably play the game first before you jump into the solo mode, because you need to understand quite a few different things with the solo rewards, and especially with the universities and various other things having to be they have to have their own appendix of what they do in terms of the solo mode. It's just a bit too much to learn off the get-go. It's not a flaw of the game, it's just bear that in mind. I made that mistake. Maybe you're smarter than me, I don't know, but it's not a recommendation I would make to just jump into the solo with no other preparation at all. But the solo mode is actually quite easy to pilot once you've got the rules down. There's just a little bit of a learning curve, but the reference aids for this are very good, because It gives you an actions and a workshop turn for the solo mode, again, step by step, and I do mean step by step in this case. I mean, you know, the workshop turn, for example. Step 1, roll the die. Step 2, select the highest value die in the space. Step 3, move the die to the first space. Step 4, push the lowest die out. Step 5, gain a solo reward. Then there's more besides. It really does go into good detail, and it's a great memory jogger. But then on top of that, you've got 2 double-sided ones here for each of the action, and again, it tells you what it does for the main, based on what die it took, the advanced action, and whether it constructs or publishes at the end. These solo aids are brilliant. Honestly, I think more games need to do these kind of reference aids, because there are some games that will do reference aids that are just bullet points, like little memory joggers. But I think step-by-step things with text on them like this sort of size are perfect. Everybody tries to squeeze reference aids on tiny little cards like this. No, don't be afraid to give me like a Dixit 7 Wonders size card or oversized one like this with clear instructions on it step by step, because trust me, it makes learning the game and teaching the game so much easier. They've got the right idea here, and I want to see more games do it.
Making it bigger doesn't make it clearer.
The solo player is actually a pretty good module. It replicates a multiplayer experience very well, with one little, well, not a drawback, one little caveat. It's random how it takes dice in here. Yes, it will go for high value ones, and yes, it will go for its preferred color, but which bit it selects is entirely a die roll. So yeah, there's a tiny bit of randomness there. And it will cheat in terms that it doesn't necessarily use certain resources, but it's nowhere near as bad as other games actually. You know, it's getting solo awards, it's getting its own type of awards, but it doesn't feel so cheaty like other AIs, where it basically achieves the impossible for no effort whatsoever. It's going to be keeping tabs on you throughout the game. Now, I've played it on difficulty 1 and 2 and 3, and certainly the difficulty does ramp up pretty quickly. If you play this on difficulty 1, unless you're deaf, dumb and blind, you should beat it. It really is not that hard to beat the level 1 AI. That is assuming you get all the rules right, hence play for it first. But when you go to difficulty 2 and difficulty 3, it does scale up pretty fast, where you really are going to have to make certain that you're doing well on your board and not messing up. Difficulty 2, I think, seems like the sweet spot of being a reasonable challenge, but if you're good enough at the game, you should be able to beat it. And then difficulty 3 is when you want a suitable challenge that you're probably maybe going to lose a little bit more often than you're going to win. I've not played difficulty 4, but wow, difficulty 3 is hard enough. Difficulty 4 probably is going to give you a run for your money, but you know, whatever level of masochist you are, there'll be something for you. But overall, yeah, really good solo implementation. You know, there's not a huge amount of extra parts. You have got, you know, it's well written. You know, there's just a decent amount of new rules that you have got to learn for it. So it's maybe not quite as accessible immediately as some other Eurogame solo modes, but it's just because there's a lot of internet connectivity. There's a lot of different, you know, bonuses that a player could get that can't, you know, apply to a solo player. So there's going to be an element of that. But with the reference aids, with the graphic design and everything, it does a very good job of replicating a multiplayer experience to the point where, you know, I mean, multiplayer is fun, but you get a similar feeling out of the solo mode. You might find yourself playing it solo more often.
This man is overgasped.
So I've mentioned a few niggles here and there, you know, little aspects with the player scale, little aspects with some of the graphic design, and maybe one or two little bits here that I thought, maybe a little bit more here and there that I could see being improved. But it's not like death by a thousand cuts. The only real sort of main flaw to mention is deal with the fact that it could generate a bit of AP, that it probably goes a bit longer than it says on the box, and you know, from a player scaling perspective, you are sort of deciding between open-ended and time length with a lot of the time. You know, the solo module gets around that by being a very good one, but not everybody plays the game solo. Free player is definitely a sweet spot for the game in general, but those little niggles and that don't really add up to a lot of problems. The game itself, in terms of its pros, does give you a lot for your buck. You've got a lot of different ways to customize the setup once you're used to the game. Once you get bored with the pre-printed setup, you've got lots of different options, all the 4 different actions to focus on or diversify across. You've got your, you know, are you going to do well with the dice, do well with the gears, do well with the program tiles? And even then, you've got a lot of different options on your turns, lots of different ways to get what it is you need. You don't feel like you're being pigeonholed. You don't feel like you're too restricted. There's some way to get what you need. You just need to be able to go and do it. And it gives you a really cool puzzle feel with how you're going to, which dice you're going to take, what values, where they're going to go on your board, how they're going to satisfy your little program tiles, coupled with the really cool mechanic of having the cards that you really want to play. It's got that kind of Underwater City style lure to it, where it's like, I really want to play this card while I do this action. It doesn't feel right if I don't play the card, but do I need a higher value die? Well, I need to make a certain idea with that. There's just a lot of cool things to think about and a lot of cool things to do during the game, that those little niggles that I mentioned don't get in the way to a great extent. It's well produced, it looks nice and colourful on the table. Yeah, the artwork's nothing stand out apart from the cover, but it still looks nice and will draw attention. It's going to satisfy those point salady victory point, Eurogame fans to a T. It certainly scratches a similar itch to Newton, as I mentioned, where it's like a few little mini games that interconnect with each other. The rules, straightforward for a game of this many options. It's a very good rule book. It's laid out pretty well, and the reference aids, both for solo and for players, multiplayer, are done very well as well. The only minor blemish was that I wish there was an iconography guide in reference aid form rather than having to go into the book. But, a lot of publishers fall foul of this. I'm going to moan about it each time until people start doing it more often, but, it doesn't make the game a hurdle to learn. It just might mean that your first game is effectively a learning game. Well, what do you expect for a game with this many options and this kind of Euro puzzly feel? It's a really solid game. I've enjoyed this a lot. I actually think I kind of prefer this to Newton. Would I want to keep both games? Because I know the two are going to be kind of compared. I mean, I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think I shouldn't compare these two games? But for me, it's hard not to. I think overall, I prefer Ada's Dream. I think it just gives me a few more options. It's a little less restrictive than Newton can be. And I think this one, takes the crown for that kind of spot, as much as I enjoyed the other one. I'm giving this one a very good, solid 9 out of 10. It's not 10 out of 10 territory, no. There are still some niggles with it, and it's certainly a lengthy game, and it's gonna, require a little bit of a learning curve at first, but overall, I've really enjoyed this. I only demoed it slightly to begin with, and I knew it had potential, and it's lived up to that potential. Some improvements could be made here and there over time. And I don't know whether the small expansion addresses any of that. I don't think it does from what I've seen. I think it's just mostly more variety and a new mechanic, which I don't think the game desperately needs much more mechanics. There's enough going on as it is. But, I have good fun with this one, and so have the people I've played it with. When you play it once, you go, oh, that was cool. Now I want to play it again, and now I want to focus on this aspect. Now I want to focus on this aspect. And, there's a lot of times you can play this before you've exhausted every strategy here. There's just a good amount of variety and thinkiness and puzzly nature for the amount that you're spending on the game, which is not crazy expensive compared to a lot of Euros, but also it doesn't have to completely overwhelm you like, say, a Lacerda or a Mind Clash game, which is obviously super complex, gives you a bucket load of stuff to think about, but are probably more restrictive than this one is. It's just a good, solid, Eurofied, point puzzly game where the theme is nice enough for a setting, but obviously it's not like the most thematic game ever. It just suits what it needs to do. It's really solid. 9 out of 10. I'm keeping this one, and I look forward to teaching this to more people as the year goes on. But yeah, if you're heading to Essen, give this one a try. Give this one a try. It's pretty damn solid.
Good news, everyone!
So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube, thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. Get those thumbs there, get the comments down below, let me know your thoughts on the game, good and bad, ask any questions, that kind of thing. It all drives engagement, both here and on Board Game Geek, so I definitely want to see more of that. Check out the rest of the content I've been doing. There's been plenty of little speed reviews, a couple of big reviews here and there, top 10 list a little while ago, a podcast episode talking about game IPs I'd like to be brought to the tabletop world. And as we get onto Essen, I will of course do some additional preview content to talk about preparing for Essen Convention, and also more about what games I'm kind of looking forward to trying when I go there. And hopefully I'll be able to get this edited before I go to Prague. If I happen to spot you in Prague at a board game cafe or anywhere else, then by all means say hi. It will be a bit of a fluke if we turn up like that, but I'm looking forward to this little holiday, and it's going to be a nice little break. But hopefully I can get this video out before I leave, and it will give you something to view until then. So take care, and remember, regardless of whether you're capable of living up to Ada Lovelace's standards or not, it's still only a game. So bye for now.